Black revolutionaries, distillery owners, Italian fashion retailers, and Motown Grammy winners all share their best stories never before told in any other media outlets on Detroit is Different. Visit DetroitisDifferent.com or download the Detroit is Different app on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store.
We are back in the Detroit is Different podcast studios after the 4th of July. And this is a very unique episode, being that America definitely has had its troubles, especially with people that are not of Germanic, French, or English roots. Historically, it's been tough, but the principles and the Constitution for where America stands and how it stands is one of those things that was trickled down from many different ethics of Roman traditions, Greek traditions, which really were taken from a lot of Egyptian traditions of what democracy is, how democracy exists, how people interact, how to build a society together, and what voice the people have. And like many of these great dynasties, when we think of the Roman Empire, when we think of the Greek Empire, even when we think of a lot of the Egyptian empires, historically we look over time, and many of these empires, or the British Empire, I guess that's the last one that they'd say fell, or Russia, the fall and the demise of many things come from the people themselves and where people stand. I give this long introduction because somebody that stands with the people on right now what seems to be the critical issue of humanity moving forward, and that issue is water, and where water stands in America and also internationally, as the tragedy of the Holocaust that's going on in Flint, connected to our current gubernatorial cabinet or team, however you want to look at it. It's a bigger challenge than even just Governor Snyder alone. I definitely think a lot of the responsibility bears at his feet, but not just with him, but so many others, as water is becoming more and more of a precious commodity, and the water that can be used, due to the way we as humans have have treated water, it has not necessarily in the abundance that it once was generations ago. So today, someone for the first time, a guest on Piper's podcast on the Detroit is Different network and the Detroit is Different podcast happens. You're the first. You're like you are the I don't even know what that first person is, but
I'm the inaugural.
The inaugural, yes, exactly.
Representative. All
yes.
right, up in the stew.
So, Monica Lewis Patrick, how are you doing today?
I'm incredible, and just honored to be here with you, and just a pinch me moment to realize I'm the first. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Between both podcasts, you are the first. It's going to be some people that spill over and cross, but you're the first person. When we were on Piper's podcast, I was like, I got to have you come on Detroit is Different. It's a different flow. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of information because that's just who you are. But what's the backstory? What's Monica Lewis Patrick's life like? So first, your ties and your family's ties to Detroit. What led you to the city?
Yes, well, I came to the city of Detroit in 2008. I moved here in 2008 after I had been downsized from my job. My youngest daughter had been dropped off on my doorstep and left and abandoned, and I was going through a divorce and just finished grad school. And so turning 40 and having all of these convergences happen at the same time, I felt like it was a moment for me to declare my independence and freedom. And I had always wanted to live in Detroit as an adult, but had never had the opportunity or never saw the opportunity. And so I took advantage of it.
Okay, now that is unique, as I've known you for a while, so it's almost like I met you when you first got here.
When I first got
here. And I
here.
never even put two and two together. Where were you coming from?
Well, I was coming from a small town in northeast Tennessee called Kingsport.
When you say small, how many people?
About 44,000.
Okay.
Yeah. And you have the international home of Eastman Chemical Company there. At one point, it was the national offices of Meade. Many industrial elements there. It was also the home of Eastman Chemical Company's connection to Holston Defense, which built the nuclear bomb. And so we often, had this looming threat of disaster and harm because of being noted for that. But then also my family is the Horton family. My grandfather's the seventh oldest brother of Willie Horton, the baseball player. And then also his twin sister, my Aunt Faye, was married to Dr. Junius Griffin, who we call him Uncle Toby, he was part of the team for the SCLC that served Dr. Martin Luther King as a speechwriter. He was also a part for Barry Gardy when he started doing the spoken word series. He was the person that he dubbed to actually coordinate that series. And then from there, he became Barry Gordy's vice president of public relations for about 25 years. And so we consider ourselves a granddaughter of the city of Detroit. And so we never saw ourselves separate from what was happening in Detroit. It was nothing for my grandfather to put 13 grandchildren in a station wagon and drive us to Detroit. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, we wake up and we're crossing the city line. And he'd say, "Wake up, Hortons," because the Horton name means something in Detroit. And so I've always had a deep love and admiration for the city. But coming in 2008, at a time where I had come from a long legacy, my mom was a community organizer and a labor union representative. She also served the military for 24 years as a master sergeant. She still, at 73 years old, can be called up by the U.S. Army because of the unique MOS that she has. And then she worked for the Veterans Administration for 35 years. And so,
what labor union? What union?
American Federation of Government Employees. And so we've walked picket lines. We've been a part of protests.
And this was like, and there's so many questions I got already. The question I generally ask always is, what do people think? But your family was already familiar with Detroit.
Oh gosh, yeah, we were a part of Detroit.
And when I think Tennessee, I naturally think Memphis.
No.
And I think blues.
Yes.
And I think, as I say, that knee smack music.
Hey, that's that hard working. It always reminds me of railroads and coal mining.
Yes.
But in the state of Tennessee, it's a long state. I can actually travel from my home in Tennessee, northeast Tennessee, to Memphis, and I can get to Detroit quicker from my home than I can to the other end of Tennessee, where Memphis is. 57% of the African American population in Tennessee lives in Shelby County, where Memphis is. Where I am from, about 1.2% of the population is people of color.
Wow.
So we grew up in a dynamics where we were often perceived as a minority, but because our family was so large and our connection to what we saw was struggle and the Black Power movement, we never saw ourselves as less than or a minority.
But also being like so few Black people in that area, like if you know what I'm saying, like if it was like 10 o'clock at night and you walking around, they like, I know who your mama is.
Oh, definitely. Till this day.
It's like you can't.
But you also had some major social movement resistance going on in my small town. There were race riots in 76. There was an incident where Black girls were not allowed to try out for the cheerleading squad, and there were only less than 300 Black students out of a school of about 3,000. And they were able to mobilize and activate some of their white allies and basically address race in a very aggressive and violent way. And out of that, you had us on lockdown and under martial law for almost a month.
Wow.
A lot of people don't know, in the state of Tennessee, we were the last state to fully implement integration in terms of public education. My ex-husband did his thesis on the issue, and what we found is that in the years of 2000, you only have 7 teachers, where when you had your own school system, you actually had 67 educators in your community. And so with those kinds of dynamics, black children are seeing less and less people of color in my hometown in positions of power and leadership.
Even to this day.
Oh, this day, it's more so. Because now you don't have the power structure. One of the things that happened is they lost property. Even historic buildings were condensed into now community centers for the elite and for those that Eastman Chemical Company are moving in. That's why when I moved to Detroit in 2009, the first thing I told Deborah Taylor when I saw that Dave Bing was running, I said, oh, gentrification is coming on steroids. I saw it very clearly with that election, and then after working the election.
Okay, now, a couple other things. You talked about your mother being in the union as the union, the roots of the union, especially in Detroit. It's very much romanticized in some ways. But let's be explicit. The start of the unions was really the fact that at one point in time, many corporations wanted to hire black workers. So white workers unionized to keep black workers from working.
Yes.
Now that was the first, exclusionary tactic of the union. The second exclusionary tactic of the union was men organizing against women.
Yes.
So being that your mother was a black woman working in the unions, what did she talk about what she was facing? Just because I'm guessing at the time in the era was probably 60s, 70s, where that was unprecedented.
Well, I think coming out of a union family that was a part of coal mining in the late 40s and early 50s in West Virginia, because that's where we have our roots. Our family were a key part. My great-grandfather, who actually moved to Detroit in 1952, because the unions had been suppressed in West Virginia, and there had been a major loss in jobs. And so the auto industry, of course, was on the upswing. But one of the things that happened is that there was also an influx. They were using prison labor from Brushy Mountain Prison in Tennessee to actually bust up the unions. And so this is when unions began to understand that it would be better to align themselves and bring more black men in than it would be to allow them to be undercut by prison labor. And so this is where we saw ourselves deeply rooted in that struggle, because my great-grandfather and his brothers were a part of that struggle, those fights, those deaths, carrying men out of the mines while at the same time having to fight the men to get in the mines to go to work. But then for my mom, right before she retired after 34 years, almost 35 years with the Veterans Administration, she had served as a union steward at the national level. As a matter of fact, her last tenure as a union steward at the national level was under the leadership of Charles Barkley's father, whom she had major differences with. He was a deeply staunchly committed to Republican values, often very much repressive of women in leadership. And anybody that knows anything about my mother, she is no one to challenge or temper with. But the union president actually, right before she retired, she was a part of exposing that her union president had been a part of suppressing not only several elections that would have put more minorities into leadership, but she had actually targeted my mother and did several things that would have caused my mother to actually have a criminal charge against her, because the Veterans Administration operates as a city within itself. It's called Mountain Home. So it has its own police department, fire department, and everything. And one of the things this lady did is she also had a person plant snakes, 2 snakes, poisonous snakes, in another person who had been an officer's car. And so all of this information got exposed through the federal.
Sounds like that Snakes on a Plane movie or something.
Oh, it's bananas.
Yeah,
but you had three federal agents through the FBI because of my mother's documentation and experience in the military in filing these kind of federal grievances. She was able to expose this issue, and it's actually still pending in terms of litigation to resolve the harm that was done. Yeah. But it was 57 people that were actually brought up on charges.
Yeah. And yeah, as snakes on a plane are funny, I just know when a bee is in the car, I'm tripping.
Yes.
So I can only imagine what a snake in the car would have a person flip out.
Oh God, yeah, 2 poisonous snakes, and what made them know it had to be a plant is these breeds do not intersect with one another. So to have them together, they knew that it had to be a plant. But a lot of this was exposed through the depositions. A lot of people had been threatened because, like I said, it has its own police force. So the police chief actually was brought up on charges. He had been a part of this cover-up and this intimidation. But you're talking about the same woman who served in the Persian Gulf War and was a part of bringing down her commander, who had actually gotten them lost 15 miles behind the Iraqi lines. And you can go back and look at a film clip on CNN where Senator Sasser from Tennessee challenged Dick Cheney when Dick Cheney said that all of the military had been home. And Senator Sasser told him that he was a damn lie because the 912th Mass Unit from Tennessee had not returned. My mother was a part of that unit. She was also in the explosion in Bahrain where you had 52 Brits killed. So, like I said, you take a no-nonsense, tried and true black woman who has been through the hardest of times of labor organizing, who has been to war, who has been through divorce, and who has raised 4 children on her own. I would put anybody up against retired Master Sergeant Sonora Lewis.
With your mom's is seeming very fascinating at this point in time on so many levels. Because of the eras that she's doing this. Being in the military even to this day, yes, for a woman is very difficult. One of my, I guess girlfriends in high school or whatever, served 2 tours of duty in Iraq. And wow. And has struggled with PTSD since, and visiting somebody in the psych ward or the Veterans Memorial is a whole nother reality. Yes. And she's in a premise every time I visited her, yes, where she's okay. Yes. But some of the stuff I see, I had to, I've never experienced it. I had to take off my belt. I had to take off my phone, any pins. I had to, it was certain words they said, you can't say this. I was like, damn, I don't even.
Triggers.
And and people of all ages, from young to old. So I'm sure probably some veterans from Korea, like my grandfather, to people in Iraq.
Half of my mother's unit that was my age, my siblings' age, so the age of her children, all of those people that she was a part of recruiting are dead. Over half of her unit. And the younger ones died quicker than the older ones.
So in this whole just reality of seeing mortality, as I was definitely a big anti-war person, and then I've talked to more soldiers that have served, and they kind of break it down look, man, when you're over there, you're not really thinking about the politics of it all. You just kind of build the camaraderie of the person next to you.
That's right.
Per se. So with these close-knit relationships and then still keeping a family together, what has been your mother's perspective when it comes to relationships and connecting with people, especially seeing now her daughter do a lot of work that can put you in, I don't want to say harm's way, but harm's way?
Well, my mother always talked to us from the standpoint, and I guess, with her being in the military so long and much of our childhood, she's a person that operates in principles and honor. She lives by the honor code. She believes you do right just for right's sake. You don't do it because people are watching or to be acknowledged. You do it because it's the right thing to do. And I think because that's her value system, that's always been how she's expected us to operate. Not saying that I think we've always measured up, but I know that the measuring stick has always been present. And so this expectation that you give back, that you have a debt that you owe, that people have sacrificed for you to even have the privileges that you have. And a lot of her conversation was not so much about patriotism. That was never her lens. It was always about God and family for her. And her motives for going to war was because when my father got back from Vietnam, he was a shell of the man that he was. And so he became addicted to heroin and abandoned the family after returning from war about 5 years later. So my mother went from being a housewife, a stay-at-home mom, to quickly being thrust into the work environment, pregnant with my brother, and then began nursing school about 6 months after my brother was born. And so nursing became an avenue of upward mobility for our household because she could basically make a livable wage caring for us. But it was always a reminder that if not for the grace of God, there go I. And that because of our family and the strong family network, that we had all that we needed within that network. And so I think believing that, you know, my grandmother had a phrase that she would tell us all the time, that if you eat biscuits and gravy, you're just as full as the man that ate steak. And so she talked
That
to
is
us.
a Southern saying, if
Oh,
it ever
yeah.
was.
It is. It is. But think about the power of it. The power of it is
like
what
it.
she was telling us, is that we don't lack anything. And comparing ourselves to someone else that we
like
perceive as having something, a lot of times you'll miss what you have. And she was this great, I would consider her a theologian, but also community organizer. When they shut down our community pool, where black kids could no longer go to the swimming pool in our small town to force the revenue toward the white pool to sustain it, my grandmother took all 13 grandchildren downtown and made us sit all day with her while she bullied the mayor into giving her the keys to the pool. My grandmother couldn't swim. And he put her over the pool, and she ran the pool for 8 years. She got about 12 young brothers trained as lifeguards. They had never had them a part of the Red Cross training before until she came. She was part of the network of black women that then went through training through the first aid of the American Red Cross to then become the mothers in our schools, in the clinics, so that our mothers had a presence, our grandmothers had a presence. So Pinky Lee was a fireball, honey. I mean, she's unmatched in terms of how she could take a church, and by the time she get finished, I don't care what the preacher was talking about. If there was an issue in the community, she was going to have those people mobilized and organized and showing up somewhere.
Deep. So this all kind of goes into also with your grandfather, these trips to Detroit.
Yeah.
So do you remember your first trip to Detroit?
Oh my gosh. Whew. I think the first trip that I remember was my Uncle Willie owned a club, a nightclub. And there may even be a picture that somebody put up on Facebook. But he let all of the teenagers come over, and I was like maybe, the younger one of the
so
group.
you were like the
I was like 10.
You were like the one they were like, oh, why is she gotta come?
Not really though, because each cousin has a favorite cousin. And so we call each other sister cousin, brother cousins, so you always had a northern cousin that sort of would take you under their wing and make sure it was cool that you got to go places. And so we got to go, we went skating. Then my grandfather took us over because my uncle had a game that day. So we went over to Tiger Stadium.
Wow.
And, of course, him and his brothers were up in the stadium, drinking moonshine out of mason jars.
Nah, that's because I'll get up.
Oh, yeah. But it was so much fun.
Old Tiger Stadium was probably a BYOB kind of
place. It really was. I'm saying, like, they had bags of sandwiches and stuff. This is how throwback it was. And my uncle he was giving us all of this stuff. Yeah. No.
To Comerica Park with your own flask.
Well, we shook Comerica Park up a little bit when about 500 Horton showed up for the statue unveiling. They were not ready for these folks, and my uncle's, of course, telling Mr. Elliott that Willie's all right, but I could really play. So
it's a story Isaiah Thomas was saying his rookie year when he was in the when he got in the league. He was like, my mama was bringing chicken to the game.
I'm sure they probably had chicken in the limousine. I tell you, they probably had it in there.
I was like, Mama, it's like high school.
Well, you get 18 Hortons. I mean, that's how many
18
siblings.
Hortons.
That's how many siblings it was. And you've got what? At least 4 sets of twins.
Wow.
So, a huge family like that. My Uncle Willie grew up with my mom. He grew up more like a sibling with my mother. My grandparents actually took care of him until he was 9, and then he moved to Detroit with my grandparents. But my grandparents had grandchildren the age of him.
Wow. Now, this is the thing, because he's Willie Horton's definitely, shout out to my high school, Northwestern. Northwestern guy. They actually just renamed the new ballpark. It's in Willie Horton's honor. Old Tiger Stadium, as they say.
Yeah.
That Pal's doing, but now as you're telling this story, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Joe Lewis's story, as I'm kind of connected to some of that Barrow family.
Okay. Yeah.
Of when a person does come north and quote unquote make it, now you still send back and work with and support the family of the roots that still exists. Yeah. So those brothers and sisters, and then I guess even extending like his cousins that grew up like brothers and sisters, what role did Willie play in the lives of everybody else?
I would say, it brought a lot of pride, I think, to a family coming out of coal mining and struggle. You got to think, my grandparents, the house that he bought my grandparents, that sits right next door to the Ford family's home over in Boston Edison. That house was the first house that they ever owned.
Wow.
And it was shortly after that they were killed in the car accident. And so knowing that kind of struggle, my grandmother used to talk about hiding pots of beans and greens under the bed to make sure that everybody could eat, because they ate in shifts, because the older kids were working and the younger kids were still at home. And so when they would get out of school, some of the folks that worked in the mines would already be home. And so she cooked in shifts. One of my uncles talks about he never saw my grandmother not in the kitchen, except when she was going to church, with that many people to care for.
Wow.
And so, it's out of that kind of labor and hard work that I really try to honor and respect what that meant. But I think Uncle Willie, for us, was the embodiment of the great American story of success.
And I, in the times meeting him at Northwestern, he's very silent when I've met him. Like, he's not like a very gregarious attitude or anything like that. Almost to the fact, like, you have to know that that's Willie Horton to know Willie Horton's right there. So I can only imagine his brothers and sisters have to be a lot more like just.
Oh man, these personalities are bigger than life, and I think all of them took a lot of pride when he came back home to Virginia. I brought him back to Tennessee and Virginia in, I would say, the mid '90s, leading up to the late, for about 7 years. We coordinated something called the Willie Horton Baseball for Kids benefit down south.
Wow.
And we did 3 days of activities to raise funds to make sure that children had what they needed to return to school, with school supplies and adequate clothing. And so we were preparing them with all their school supplies and a week's worth of clothing. And out of that grew not only the Willie Horton Baseball for Kids event, but then the governors of Tennessee and Virginia began to battle over who Willie belonged to.
Hilarious.
And out of that, what came to pass was they created a wall of fame in Virginia that sits on the state lines of Tennessee and Virginia, where they are acknowledging his work, not only in terms of being a legendary sports figure, but also the work that he's done as a humanitarian. He has led several teams in Venezuela to international baseball championships. He was there during the civil unrest in Venezuela and was a major part of calming that dis-ease. He has been an international baseball ambassador, so globally he has gone to China and Korea and just all over the world, promoting baseball as a way to acknowledge that we're all human and how can we use sports to bring us together. And then he was acknowledged in, I want to say around 2010, by the U.S. military for his humanitarian work on behalf of veterans, because he has so many siblings and nieces and nephews that have served during the
I'm
Persian
sure your
Gulf
mom
War.
played some influence in that.
Well, it was actually my cousin Paul who
okay.
had played semi-pro basketball and then joined the military. And because of his deep relationships with many pro athletes around the country, I don't know if people know a lot about the Sensabaugh boys, that many of them that play pro ball, Gerald Sensabaugh and Cody Sensabaugh, all of those guys came off of my block down in Tennessee. And so a lot of times they are brought in to give back to that. But I would say for us, Uncle Willie has been the embodiment of not only what it means to be a part of a family, but I think what it means to be a part of a community, because it's Detroit that has loved on him and continued to make sure that his legacy was secured here.
And while facing all the pressure of so much attention and celebrity and fame and focus of people, worship celebrities in seeking the opportunity to I guess, explore what they feel as though will give them fulfillment in life. And, that's powerful, which kind of leads me into the next point of interest of, you said it was always a dream to be here in Detroit.
Yes.
But now you 2008, when did it come clear that I'm going to live in Detroit?
In January the 7th of 2008, I was dismissed from my job. I had managed 8 counties of Northeast Tennessee psychiatric response services, and it was a very intense job. And it really at first was heartbreaking because I saw it as failure, and then shortly after that I recognized that it really was God allowing me to be released. I ended up in a legal battle with them that I won because of the unlawful dismissal. But at that time, I'd already made up my mind that I was going to move to Detroit. I wanted a fresh start. I wanted to at least be in a space where I felt like that I would be able to connect to what I still saw was Black power. What I saw is still culture. I wanted to expose my children after coming out of HBCU. I wanted to expose my children to more culture. Little did I know that getting here, I knew what was going on around land and around voting, disenfranchisement. Had no idea how decimated the school systems were. And so I was only here 6 months before I was quickly in the throes of the fight against mayoral control.
Now, as we talk about that, I had an interview with Roderick Miller that led the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, and he's from small southern town as well. And he just talked about like how he sees not even necessarily the racism and the discrimination, but just the, I guess, submissive attitude, I'm surmising this, of a lot of Black people to not really want to stand up the way he'd even see down south sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
What was, because even when my cousins to this day come from other cities, they're like, man, there's so many Black people here. That's like one of the first things they always say. And I'm like, yeah. And, you take it for granted when you live here, but
that's right.
And you were visiting, but moving here is different than visiting.
Oh, yeah.
So moving here, what was standing out as far as like, not just, let's just say what stood out about the leadership in Detroit as you moved here?
Well, I think one of the things that I saw quickly is there were several what I would consider grassroots leaders that were exhibiting leadership that I could respect and I felt like was providing the right analysis and direction. You have to also remember we still had the Michigan Citizens, so we still had a narrative being shaped from a people Detroiter frame, Black folk frame. So that to me was still an intact component that was powerful. You still were visibly seeing the semblance of some clergy and some labor leadership exhibiting some at least lip service to the right issues. And I might have been deceived by that a little bit, thinking that it was power when it really was posturing. But at the time, I saw it as these voices were speaking a narrative of power and liberation that I wanted to be a part of contributing to. But shortly after being here for a period of time,
would you say months? Would you say a year?
It was months. It wasn't even a year.
Full 12.
No.
Okay.
No. Quickly, what happened is that one is I began to work on the issue around what was happening with the election, and so worked on the Barrel campaign against Dave Being. Worked also on the recount because we were seeing some inconsistencies, and so we were a part of challenging that election. Then quickly within that process, we worked on pushing back against mayoral control, because this is where we saw that they were eroding the rights of parents to have a say in their children's education. And so many of the women that I work with today, I didn't know before then. I met them in this process of just mothers and grandmothers and aunts and uncles showing up, fighting for their children's right and their say in their children's education. And Deborah Taylor, who's my best friend and business partner, the media could not accept that this was just residents coordinating this in this fashion, because this was 5 weeks of vigilance on our part. This was us showing up every day, holding court in city council meetings and taking up all the time for public comment. I mean, just commandeering the meetings. And so one of the media asked, "Who are you? You have to be a group." And Deborah said, "We are the people of Detroit. We are the people." And that name stuck. And so they began to call us, "Oh, those are the We the People people." And yeah, and it was more dismissive than it was affirming. But for us, we took it in an affirming way and began to call upon our own power. Shortly after that, Councilmember JoAnn Watson dubbed Deborah and I to come on staff. And so we served her honorably for about 3.5 years. And then she asked me in 2013, along with 11 other community elders, to run for city council in 2013. But our work was initially just around that particular issue and not seeing people connect the dots, not seeing a thorough analysis. And then one of the things I've learned very quickly in Detroit is that folks, because of relationships, will allow people to continue to do things that are bad leadership behaviors, but they'll forgive them because, you know, they went to Central High School with me, or they went to Northern High School, or they lived in my zone, or whatever. And so without that being brought to the table too, I think we're going to continue to miss it. And not saying we can't forgive folks and give them a re-entry back into community, but we can continue to let people, just because they hold positions, continue to provide bad analysis and bad leadership.
Now, as we talk about that, this is still such a people-driven city, like, you know, and Mama Watson even one time looked at me like, you know how she'll sometimes give you a look like, what you talking about? But I'm like, sometimes, like, you know, is the issue bigger than the person? Because it's like, this is a very personal city, it seems like.
Yes,
like,
it is.
Almost everything is like, well, you know, he used to, and it, you know, I've even heard stuff about me, and it's like, nah, I'm independent in thought. You know, people that, you know, like even right now, and I just the point, and that's still my brother in arms. I just don't agree with his point on the Kanye West people in choosing to be enslaved is such a backwards point, and we still gotta come make amends in Reverend Bullock, but that's still my homie, you know, and that's my brother. But I think is, you know, how do you feel about being able to disagree with a person, and due to your disagreeing with the person and wherever they're at, saying things that you don't agree with, so now I can't align with you with my social capital, because I you know, I still feel a level of responsibility to people that respect my point of view and perspective. And just because I have a personal relationship with you doesn't even mean that we can't possibly hang out. You still aren't someone I'm friendly with. but I can categorically disagree with you when it comes to your stances, especially when it comes to the frailty of where things stand with people and what we align ourselves with.
I think that can happen with some people.
Okay.
But I'll give you an example. In all the years that I've been in the city, I still have not seen, based on the amount of power and positioning that he wields, enough good leadership from Wendell Anthony.
Mm-hmm.
So when I ran in 2013, my council member, who had been the first black woman to head up the largest NAACP in the country, she invited.
Let me say this too.
She invited me to come.
Mm-hmm.
I refused to come because I felt like that it would have been a betrayal of Reverend Pinckney, who was out front protesting. But I also too felt like that it would have been an affront to the people that was asking me to take on leadership in the community. And the reason I say that is not because I don't like him. I think he probably is one of the greatest orators in the city right now. I think that he is a brilliant man, but I question his allegiance and what he's committed to. Anytime you've got the school system in the position it's in, and we're on national conversations about the decimation of our schools, and we hear nothing coming out of the largest branch in the nation, when you have water shutoffs to the degree that we have them, over 100,000 households, and you have nothing coming out of the largest chapter in the nation, and when you have an illegal foreclosure that has forced over 100,000 households into foreclosure, and you have nothing coming out of that leadership, and we have to go around that leadership to national tables to get the support that we need to litigate and legislate these issues, then those issues are problematic. And so I can separate thinking he's charismatic and brilliant and all of that from what I see as failed and flawed leadership.
The 2 points that I have, and I have a lot of points on Wendell Anthony, but one is just the Detroit NAACP. I think it's a shame that organization, which really, as far as the inner workings of it and all the work is done by women, and that when you walk in on that wall of all the executive directors that you see and presidents, you only got one woman's face. That organization has been around since basically the start of the NAACP. I think that's a shame.
That's right.
I think it's such a shame, but it's one of those things, like it's like the pimp prostitute perspective of the women are doing the work, and I've even sometimes seen that. So I definitely am against that, but it kind of leads back to the Wendell Anthony thing of his alliances over the time, I guess you can move further from the heart of where it's at. The first time I remember really getting an idea of who Wendell Anthony was dealing with America's fights against apartheid. And then soon after, I remember him, I didn't even know what apartheid was because I'm a kid, you know what I'm saying? And he's standing strong against apartheid. A place I used to get my car washed over on Dexter, it's closed now, like Dexter and Amherst, right next to Dexter Amherst Center. And they had all this stuff. So I'm assuming the owner must have been a fellowship member, just honoring the legacy of Wendell Anthony. So you go there and get your car washed and you just read all of this stuff about what Wendell Anthony did and who he would walk with and stand with. And over time today, how I see his allegiance, rallying on behalf of Mayor Duggan, statements like he's not the white mayor, he's the right mayor, which I'm not even necessarily against Duggan, but I think that being that he categorically, when Benny Napoleon was running, stood on some stance of they're taking away black leadership, all of that. And it's so in this 4 years, I guess, keeping that big church, the taste of having a small child, having a wife that he has, I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
But I'm not mad at Wendell Anthony. But my job as what I consider to be a true community activist and advocate is to be able to help my community draw an analysis as to where their power is being lent or leveraged against them, and how to regain it, and how to utilize it in a way that's serving them. So it wouldn't matter, as much as I love my mama, and I don't like nobody better than my mama, if she was in error. And I'll give you an example. In my hometown, Eastman Chemical Company bought up all of the leadership of the NAACP. And they've been controlling it for years. Well, me and a couple of other young people decided that we were going to organize our community and make it more reflective of what we thought was a democratic community. And we did this over the course of the summer. And we got those persons elected. And it was a mixture of age and gender and the likes. Well, my mother was voted in as a secretary, an administrative secretary, executive secretary. Well, the pastor of the church actually was the one who was cavorting with Eastman to buy up these positions. I get a call from someone on the executive board saying everybody that was elected openly has now been removed, and he has appointed people that Eastman likes to these positions. This was after we assured our community that their voice and their vote would matter, because we had gone through 30 years of Eastman not being responsive to black men being taken in back rooms and stripped down and hosed down. They had not been responsive to black men being held in elevators and some of them assaulted within their facilities.
Wow.
So we challenged that. And when we challenged that, what happened is my mother called me and she said, Monica, everything that they said happened. She said, but it was so shocking that these people that we all knew and loved and respected were collaborating in this way that even I was stunned and didn't say anything until the meeting was over. So I said to her then, I said, Mama, what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to write the national NAACP, the state, the regional, and I'm going to bring all of you up on charges as having violated the bylaws of the NAACP. So I didn't even leave my mama out.
I feel that.
But I said to her also, Mama, what you may want to do is you may want to publicly resign and state what happened for the record, so that therefore you can clear your name. But if I don't name you, then it would be nepotism. And she said, if you didn't do that, I wouldn't respect you. So I'm just saying, this is not personal, and this is why I try to really walk lightly in Detroit around relationships and kinships, is I respect those boundaries, but I also must tell Detroiters, when we continue to create these optics, those optics align us. And the leveraging of our community credibility and the leveraging of a lot of people that don't have a lot of money, but their voices count with their communities, then you're lending your credibility to that individual. And we've got to decide where our lines are.
I wholeheartedly agree. And not only with agreeing with that, I mean, kind of not, it's not even Wendell Anthony per se, but I'm using him in example. But it's just if you know someone's going awry, you can still have a lot of, the road, as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
That's right.
At one point in time, and you have to just reconvene. But even this whole idea of what leadership is to me and wanting to be in control, sometimes you have to step back and put yourself in a vulnerable position. At one point in time, on a pulse of the issues in the 80s and some of the 70s, the stories I hear about Wendell Anthony, he was a leading forward thinker on it. But as of right now, the things that are happening and how they're happening, he's not in those same positions, even as brilliant as he is in understanding systems. So it's not even just so many people, and I'm not necessarily saying old, get out the way, but you do have to be understanding.
But why not say that? We do not build plans of secession. We do not do secession planning. And then what we have is we have people that still need a check.
Yeah, you're right.
And so when you're seeking checks, then principles tend to go by the wayside. And this is where we're struggling. You know, I was at a meeting the other day with the Council of Baptist Pastors, and I said to a couple of pastors after it was over that there needs to be a convening of churches around the stormwater drainage issue, because the drainage fee is a fictitious fee. It's a made-up fee to be able to fill the coffers of DWSD and GLEWA. But at the same time, you do have too many churches. And so if you were just looking at it from a business model, it would be worth some of these clergy sitting down together and looking at consolidating their church memberships.
But the egos, I think.
But this is where we come back to.
Yeah.
And the same is the case, I would say, with Wendell Anthony and many of our leaders right now that are still sitting in seats of prominence, is that whom else are they grooming? Whom else are they preparing to step into those seats? And one of the problems that we found, and why we, the people of Detroit, is committed to youth leadership now building, is that we recognize that youth are ready to lead now. They're leading. Many times what we do is we become the clog in the wheel because the way they lead may not be the way that we were taught to lead.
I agree.
And so when we don't create these intersectional opportunities and these nexuses for our babies to be a part of these convenings, my grandmother didn't send us to play. We were in those meetings when she was challenging the mayor. We were in those meetings when she was negotiating with clergy. So these are the reasons that we understood that there was a hierarchy of respect, but I can respectfully disagree with you and tell you you're wrong. And hopefully you could do the same for me. But this sort of letting it just float in the air as to anybody black is right for Detroit, that's not true.
I agree.
And the fact that all white folks coming in is great for Detroit, that's not true.
I agree.
But anything that is not going to give us the proper analysis is not going to afford us the proper planning to be prepared for what's next.
I agree. And yeah, I mean, on that same issue, another great Northwestern quote at one point in time on the Pulse of the People, and I struggle, but it's kind of like an example of black people, period, the black existence in today. Like it's not all good, it's not all bad, but I definitely can say that the tragedy of John Conyers isn't even necessarily him stepping down. It's the fact that he was in office that long and the only person that he could support was his son that he knows. And I know the third. He's not of the ilk of people that have worked in his office, of a Yolanda Lipsey, of a Kim Trent, of a JoAnn Watson. And it's like that backwards thought process while
That's
still honoring the, like, okay, you've done all of this great.
That's
you know
right.
what I'm saying? It's sort of like, you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it'd be like me seeing Michael Jordan at the pop shot machine with your son, and he just losing the pop shot. It's like, damn, that's Michael Jordan. How can he not make these baskets?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's like, it doesn't take away the Bulls' legacy of Michael Jordan.
Nope.
But it's like, I would assume he could come to the arcade and be killing people, but he's missing.
Right.
And it's a lot of that, as you talk about people in positions within leadership, which breaks the frailty to me of the structure of what the black power at one point in time was standing for. I mean, that the Shrine of the Black Madonnas
Say it.
center right now,
Say it.
they're kicking people out in its closing. You would think that would stand as tall as the Sphinx has stood in Egypt for forever when you think of the leadership and the people that it's connected to. And I know just the personal bags of whatever, but the Shrine of the Black Madonna since the 1980s has been really connected to every political hierarchy in Southeast Michigan. And